So yeah, thanks for coming back from lunch break to talk about a very boring topic, which is enterprise UX. So for those in the room who don't know what I mean, is I design complex products and software, and they're used by internal employees on a daily basis. So things like CRM, accounting software, project management, or like basically anything management within a company tool, HR tool, inventory for retail. You have to imagine a lot of filters, a lot of giant table, and a lot of complexity and data in one single screen. That's the kind of stuff I enjoy, weirdly. So historically, people, when you talk about those two, they're like, yeah, it's boring. As a designer, I don't want to do that. It's ugly. Hard to disagree, to be honest, and it's hard to use. That's kind of the main problem most of the time. The question is then, what can we do about that? So I will talk a little bit today about my journey in UX research and design in the context of these internal enterprise tools. With the authorization of my client, I'm going to give you a little bit of context. I work for the European Investment Bank, and my team is rebuilding and migrating a 18 years old web app. So you can imagine technical legacy, but also user legacy there. And the tool is kind of a portal that lets more than 2,000 people from very different backgrounds in the bank do a lot of things, including displaying related data towards financial projects, and kind of inputting, following projects, disbursement, reimbursement, if you work in banking, all of those sort of things that is related to loaning money, basically. So my first tip, if you ever work in such environment, is before even starting doing any kind of research, talking to the users, what you need to do is get familiar with the business process, get familiar with the jargon, the wording, and get familiar with what they have currently in place, so really understand the as-is. And for this, you are going to need help, so you need to reach out to a lot of people. If you're lucky, there's documentation on business process documentation. It's very boring to read, so ask help. I am asking business analysts, but maybe you have someone else in your environment. If you work on SaaS products, software as a service, you can talk to customer support, customer representatives, voice of customers, all of those people who are like doing support and talking to the users. They can also help you understand really the business behind that. And then you are prepared. Otherwise, you will go to talk to the users and you will have no idea what they are talking about. So on my giant project, we started with quantitative analysis. We had 400 pages to migrate. So we said, OK, where do we start? And we didn't have any analytics solution installed in the old one, but we had server logs. So we retrieved server logs over a year worth of data, and we checked, OK, what are the 30 top pages? So that's what I have the top here, that people visit the most. OK. So we know what do they visit. We have no idea why do they visit those pages, but that's a start. If those pages are visited a lot, if we're migrating this step by step, MVP style, we might need those pages first. OK. We also did a giant data analysis of the content of the page. So this is like 2% of my Excel sheet, where we basically mapped out the 40 pages, and we checked for every single page, every piece of content. And first, we checked for duplicate content. Can we remove stuff? Because they're like in 3 different pages. Do we need that in 3 different pages? And we also reworked the information architecture based on that, making sure we kind of simplify the navigation a little bit and put things that belong together, which is kind of a big new step, because in the old thing, you had pages that made very little sense. They were put somewhere in the interface because there was a place there, and that was it. So we try to define, understand what belongs together. So we got the as-is. We know what do people do. We have no idea why and how they do that. So this is when we jump into user research. And I'm very lucky here because my users are technically my colleagues. I work on the IT side, they work on the business side. So it was not too complicated to find them, let's say. But we still had to make friends with different departments. So we went to the different departments and asked them to help us identify the key users. And one thing I noticed is at the beginning, I had like 2 or 3 users maximum. And then when I started interviewing them, they would refer other people to me. They were like, oh, you know, you totally need to talk to that person too. So even if I didn't have a giant user base at the beginning, by talking to them, asking for referral, slowly and slowly, we kind of built this community of users and of people who can get involved and who I can go on my own to ask questions to. One thing with giant enterprise environment is it's often very task-oriented. People use those tools to do things on a daily basis. So the research we did was very, very task-oriented. So on my screen here, I have our framework that we have with little cards. And basically, every single interview was shaped around this framework. We would go to them and we ask them, what kind of tasks do you do? And then I remembered that inside the interface, we have something that is called tasks. So I switched to what kind of activity do you do? Because otherwise, they thought I was asking about this specific part. We try to understand how do they do that. Dependencies. Do you need other tools? Do you need knowledge? Things like that. Pain points and frustrations. And in such environment, there's a couple of things and a couple of questions that work very nicely in a user interview. My favorite one is, tell me about. Tell me about, or tell me how you do that. Also, asking people to do something in front of you works very nicely. Like, walk me through how you do that. Can you show me how do you draft this kind of documents? We also try to understand the knowledge gap between what the user actually knows versus the procedure they're supposed to know, and often it's huge. No one is able to remember that kind of 300 pages of business procedure. So what are the things you need to know in order to do these tasks? And we asked them to recall things like, can you tell me last time you did that, how did it go? And one question I really like is the magic wand. If you had a magic wand, what would you change? It kind of helps them project into the future, but also like the fact that we say a magic wand kind of forces them to not think in terms of what they currently have, but kind of broader the scope of the question. So during this interview, I gathered tons of data, and a lot of it was off topic, out of scope at that moment. My advice here is keep a trace of everything, document everything, because eventually, maybe what they're talking to you about is not what you're working today as a designer, but who knows, maybe in 6 months, there will be a new project or a new part of the project where this very small piece of information will be interesting. So our research repository is Jira. Yeah, I know, it's a little bit weird. So what we do is we use Jira Actions because we don't have Confluence. And then we put the interview transcript into Jira, and it's actually weirdly efficient because the search for Jira is not that bad-ish. So I'm able to actually find really quickly what I need to do with a smart system of tagging and naming and stuff. But yeah, document everything. You don't know when this information will be handy. Also, I think this is one thing that surprised me a lot, is it's a very IT-driven environment that I knew about, but people are really not used to user-centered design process. So during the research, they would tend to express solution, and they would almost apologize for not finding me a solution. I'm like, I'm the designer. I'm the one supposed to find the solution. And yeah, you will have to dig further and further to kind of steer away from the solution a little bit like what Luke explained this morning, and towards the actual need and what they need to do. So I had that user who we were looking at one page with a giant table in the page and said, I need to export this to Excel. I need an export to Excel button. Who hasn't heard export to Excel in the last month? You're lucky. I hear it almost every day. So I was like, OK, but today you don't have an export to Excel button, so can you show me? How do you do that? So she shares the screen, she copies the whole thing in Excel, and then in Excel, she actually goes into filters, and she removes everything that is not active. So I'm like, interesting, so what are you doing? It's like, yeah, I don't care about inactive operation, I just want the active ones. So she didn't need an export to Excel. She needed a way to filter a table. But since the way she was doing it today was this kind of workaround, she expressed a solution. So this is where we are joking as designers, saying you need to ask why 5 times. Obviously, you're not going to why, why? No, you kind of find better ways to dig in, and that was my way. Like, okay, you don't have it today. Show me your workaround. And so yes, sometimes you have to very dig deeper, because those users, they're used to IT coming asking you, what do you need and where do you need it, and we're going to make it happen, hopefully. And it's like, hey, I'm here to understand you, is kind of brand new. So we gathered a lot of data, and then we had to prioritize. So at the top of my screen here, I have an Excel sheet, again, with colors. I have 4 columns. First column is business value. Second column is user value. Third column is how long is it going to take to design that. And fourth column is how long is it going to develop that. And we do those meetings where I give numbers for user and design. I have a colleague from business who gives number for the business, and then developers. And we reach out, and we end up with this matrix where my colleague did the math. Don't ask me about the math behind that. But basically, we have those 4 quadrants. And what we were looking for is quick wins first. What is used or needed for most people, and what is at the same time cheapest to develop. This is the feature we were going to migrate in the first time. And then we have those 2 things where like either high complexity for the technical, and the other one is high level of user needs. And at the bottom, we have everything that is super complex and that almost no one needs. I'm not saying we are not going to do that, but at some point when we are prioritizing the project, well, this is the stuff that is going to be migrated last. And then we have fast track. I'm a single team of 1 UX designer in that project, so I don't have time to do user research very deeply for everything. So for content that is kind of low stake and easy to migrate, for instance, a very simple table, we are using the design system. So here we're just doing a UI mockup, sending it to development. Sometimes we ask for feedback by email or just like one-on-one session with some of the users just to check the data, but that's basically it. And then we gather real data once it's developed. And then we do the huge research session for the topic that have high impact, or the topic where we have a lot of doubts, where we're like, okay, we don't know how to do that, we need to figure it out, so we need more data. And here, usually what we do is we gather the previous research, hence my repository in Jira. We try to follow up some new sessions if we need to with the users, and then we go full in. So we iterate on the design. I discuss with the developer what is technically doable or not. Then I build some prototypes, so usually in Axure. And when it's very, very complex, it's the developer who will do it in a beta version. And then we do usability testing. And the fun thing is, often when you teach UX, you're taught UX, the usability testing script is super long. You have task 1, task 2, task 3, etc., etc. Here, my usability sessions, sometimes they become mostly observational sessions. I'm like, I have this beta version of the feature, and like, please try to do whatever you need it to do today, but with the beta version. So because sometimes the user have so many different tasks and activity, it's very hard to predict. And then you're more into kind of an observational mode. So you kind of basically watch them work. So we did that remotely. You can also kind of shadow them behind the computer, but I think remotely it's easier because you can really see their screen. So that's a lot of things that we do a lot, is very observing people work with the old tool, observing them work with the new one, with a prototype, something like that. So, because again, it's very task-oriented. And sometimes users have questions during the sessions. So again, usually what you do, you're not supposed to answer user questions during just, testing, otherwise you're going to bias them. So what we do is we tell them, if you have questions, we take notes, we will answer them at the end. I always make sure I have time for them. And sometimes the end of the session is basically kind of becoming a small training, where I have a user who will ask a question about another feature. I was like, oh, by the way, did you see you can do that and that and that? So my colleague at the university would cringe, but it's like, I think it's okay at some point. Those people, they're my users, but they're also my colleagues. So at some point, if they have questions on some features that are not part of the usability test, I'm not going to say, no, I cannot answer to you, no. It will be more like, OK, I'll answer at the end. So one thing that is really cool when you have people working with you on a daily basis is you can do longer studies. So one thing we did is a user diary. Again, Excel sheet, because bank. So the idea is once they had access to the beta version, we told them, you can use that for a month if you want. And during the month, whenever something is not working or whenever you have some content missing, you can put a new line in the Excel sheet, and at the end of the month, we will collect them. So that was a nice way for them not to have to come to us every time they discover something. So they would have the Excel sheet somewhere on their desk. And we actually, I think we gathered 200 feedback with those. Sometimes it was like the technical problems issue, and sometimes it was like very more severe usability issue. And that was over a period of a month. So that's the cool thing, is like if you're working with those people on a daily basis, then you could do like longer studies, I would say. So coming from an agency background and B2C product, there's a couple of things that kind of surprised me, especially because it's the kind of stuff that you're not taught in design schools. So the first thing, and I kind of blame LinkedIn at the moment for that, is you know those LinkedIn feeds where you are like, very complex interface, make it super simple. We removed almost everything. It's like, yeah, that's not going to work in enterprise. So complex businesses require complex interfaces. Don't oversimplify it, otherwise your user will not be happy. Dramatic pause for drinking. OK, that was the advanced search. Yeah. I like that you laugh. The first time I saw that, trust me, I wasn't laughing. I was like, oh my God, what did I do? So, OK. Then, so the thing is, you might want to remove half of the filters here. You might want to say, OK, but like, do we need all of that? Really? Are you sure? The thing is, the giant monster was built. So it means that at some point, some people asked IT to build that. So some filters were here for a reason. But just because they were here for a reason doesn't mean we're not allowed to question them. Some of those filters are not even working. So yeah, there's a reason for the content. You cannot oversimplify it, but you can make it better, and you can make sure that it makes sense. So what we did is a full round of user research, trying to understand which filters are the most important. And we did a search that is very kind of lighter. Let's say we don't have the advanced search anymore. We have the search at the top. We have 5 filters by default, and then if people want more of them, they can cherry pick. In the new version, this will also keep the filter that the people chose, because some of my users will use very, very niche filter because they do something very specific that almost no one else would use. And this is the kind of stuff. So that's how we tackle this giant complexity, is having the user decide what do they need at specific moment when they do the search. And that's another thing. Often we thought design is about taking decisions. You know, it's like, yeah, it is, but customization doesn't mean you gave up as a designer. In such environment, you have so many people doing so many things on a daily basis that a lot of them will want to customize the interface. And then again, it's perfectly fine. And we forget about that. So it kind of backfired. That's another giant monster we are building. It's a portfolio with a lot of data, dates and numbers. And we were so caught up into building that we forgot to implement the story about customization. So here you have 3 things you can customize. You have the filters at the top. You have what column do you have in the giant monster. And then you have filters on the columns. And basically, this went into usability testing, and the user was super happy. They customized everything. And then they open something, they come back, and it's all gone. And like I had horrible bird team saying like, yeah, if you put that in production and it doesn't keep my option, it's worthless. It's like, worthless, okay. So this happened because we forgot to write the stories about keeping the customization. And what happens, like emergency mode, this is super important story, so we need that story before we push that to production, otherwise this is not gonna work. So yeah, customization is important. And then users need data on the screens, so we might need to find a way to bring it to them. This is where we come back to principles like progressive disclosure. And here again, it's user-generated data. So it's very hard to know how many characters I will have in those fields. Like most of the time, I have kind of a little bit, but some people love to put a giant Tolkien thingy in there, so that happens too. So usually what I do, I ask my developer what's the minimum, what's the maximum, and what's the average we have for those fields in the database. And then we have a lot of mechanisms where we have show more, show less, to make sure that we have something that is readable, but still if there's too much content, it's not going to cloud the interface. Also, the people, they want to work with the data. It's really nice it's in your system, but most of the time they want to take it out of the system, do stuff with it, copy, paste, extract. So you might need to build those things into your designs. So this is where we ended up with an actual export to Excel feature. So a couple of things that we have is, yeah, we need the export to Excel, just not where that lady needed it, but here we need it. So it's basically, we have a lot of giant table, and with the table you have bank data, and a lot of people do reporting, stuff like that. So we help them export it to Excel. In the next version, what we would love to have, but we don't have yet, would be graphs directly. Because when talking to the user, asking, like, why do you export it to Excel? Often they say, I want to do a reporting and a small graph. So we were thinking, OK, maybe if we can do the graph, then it will also help. And maybe they can also export the graph at some point, things like that. Export to PDF is something we are asked a lot. And that's very specific, but it's because some people want to work offline. Sometimes they review things in the train, stuff like that. And that's kind of the easiest way-ish at the moment. So sometimes you're like, why the hell do you want to export the full page to PDF? Doesn't make sense. Like, yeah, but then you kind of dig and you understand, like, OK, yeah, there's an actual need behind that. And one thing that they loved, this very simple feature that we implemented, is we have a page with the whole team. And today they have to manually into, how is it called, Outlook, put the name of the people in the team to send an email. We did, you know what, we can do a link with that. So what we have with the team table is like you can either send an email to the whole team or individually. And the email is already prepared where we have the subject, which is the name of the operation, all of that. And then you have the link directly. And that's one of the features they love the most. I was like, oh, this is going to make me save so much time. I don't need to copy-paste. I even need to find emails. I just click on a button. Everything is prepared, and I can share. So it's really about understanding what are the small little things that you can do to make their lives easier. And in enterprise, sometimes it's very small things that you might not think about because we're used to awesome B2C products all day long. And yeah, sometimes it's just a little thing. Then one thing that is hard to hear for some of my developers is usually they don't care about what goes into what tool about our IT ecosystem. Like, you can go from my tool to another one, and most of the people don't understand that the second tool is not us. So whenever there's a problem with the second tool, they tell us, but we're like, yeah, but we're not the support for this tool. So they don't care. It's like, I work with stuff on a daily basis. The data is there. I don't want to understand the IT thingy behind the whole tools. And they care about the number of clicks. Yeah, I have users who count clicks. And yeah, it makes sense. If you have to do the same thing all day long, you care about not having too many clicks because then, again, it makes you feel like you're wasting your time. So one thing we try to do is when we have our data in our tool and then the same kind of data or entity in other tool, we try to have these deep links, which is make sure that if they need this data somewhere else, they just can click and it opens the other tool. And that, my friend, is very hard to achieve because you need to go and negotiate with other IT teams from the other tools. Which is one of those examples where I'm like, OK, design, how long do you need? Like, very easy, 1 out of 5. Developers, 5 out of 5, because we need to negotiate, and it's going to be a mess. So it sounds easy, like, why can't I just have a link to another tool? I was like, yay. For the user perspective, yeah, the whole IT complexity behind it, not that much. And then if you want to make it even easier, you can try to retrieve data and make sure that you avoid the copy-pasting. So I just said they want to copy-paste, but at the end of the day, copy-pasting is kind of making people do more errors. So what we try to do is, again, make sure that we slowly go towards having one single source of truth. And if the data is going to be in multiple systems, we retrieve it automatically so that they don't need to input it again and again and again. And then training is expected. So this is usually kind of weird a little bit for B2C people, but you need training in different shapes. So I have a spectrum of users going from, I will never click a button unless someone in training explains to me exactly what this button does, to, I don't care about your training, just let me play with the interface. And I have to make sure all of those people understand and are happy. So we are actually offering a lot of training for this tool. We have a live session with them. And we have those happy hours. Yay. There's no alcohol. The first one was like, oh, happy hour. What's the happy hour? And my agenda is like, no, it's an hour where they come and ask us questions. Like, OK, fair enough. We have a FAQ in PDF in SharePoint, because this is how it works, which is very, very convenient. And we have quick tips in newsletters. We have dedicated teams who are on phone support duty. So that's not me, but that's directly working with the users. So there's a lot of things around training. And yeah, training doesn't mean your interface isn't good. So I'm sorry, but I'm really growing tired of this. User interface is like a joke. If you have to explain it, it's not that good. So I decided to amend it for enterprise UX, which is like any good jokes, you might need some prior knowledge, business in my case, to understand it. Doesn't make it a bad joke, doesn't make it a bad interface. So I wish we would stop glorifying this, because yeah, it's kind of catchy, but it's not accurate in a lot of places. And then, last thing that is very cool with training is another way to gather user feedback. So you'll see people who will have actual questions on your interface, and that's the best way to know what's kind of confusing and what do they expect, things like that. So if you can't have access directly to users, but you can ask to be into the training session, that would be amazing. Last part. I'm not going to lie, such environment can be very challenging sometimes. So the first thing that is very challenging is the organization is sometimes very, very slow. The way they are done, you have a lot of people with a lot of political agendas. And here the thing is, patience is kind of the only thing you can do. Most of the time when you work on those tools, you cannot expect things to change overnight. Like, we are trying to be agile, but most of the time we still need 6 to 8 months to bring a feature, which is not ideal, but it's like, yeah, you know it's going to be slow, so you are patient, and step by step, it kind of gets a little bit better. And you need to find political allies. For sure, if you want to move things around, you don't have a lot of choice. You need to break silos, and I was very lucky that the person who was my N+1 on the project was very interested in user research. And then, yeah, then they would help me kind of spread the word about how this could work. And then you need to understand what makes people click and leverage it. So I'm like, I have 99 problems, but marketing isn't one of them. But then I still need to do marketing, kind of, to convince people about stuff. So here, usually, I try to understand if the person I'm talking to is going to react to data. Are they here for their career? And if, kind of, for example, if this project is successful, it will make them shine. So that would be kind of a way to argue that. So it's really about understanding who you're talking to in those organizations. So organizational charts are your best friends. And making sure you kind of change the way you talk based on what will make them listen, which, again, takes a little bit of time and some allies. And then don't bring in an opinion to a data fight. So measure, bring proof. We are measuring a lot of things on the new interface. We are measuring different time to task, but we are also measuring user satisfaction, things like that, so that we have actually things to say. We have verbatims, so when users say nice things about that, we collect them, so that we have kind of like, this is the voice of the customer. You're saying it's not ideal, but look, all of those people are actually quite happy about that. So yeah, make sure you have unbiased data. Bad user experience in such area is the norm, because basically the value of design, the perceived value of design at least, is very low. The good news is kind of getting better a little bit. So a lot of people in such an environment, they're still pretty hard into cliché. They're like, yeah, but why should we make the tool better for the employees? They don't have any choice. I would argue that they could leave your company. That could be a good choice. So like, there's also this idea of, yeah, they don't have any choice, but at the end of the day, if the tool is very painful to use and they take a lot of time to use it, this is time they could allocate doing something else. So I really don't like KPIs around time and money and stuff like that, but at some point, if your employees are not efficient because the tools are not good, that's another argument. And then, yeah, most of those tools, I don't want to be nasty with developers, but they were like basically built with IT people without designers in the team, often just asking users what they want and where to put the button. And then you have like this giant top thing on top of a thing on top of a thing, and it becomes so complex it's barely usable. So what can you do? First, the good news is like users start to demand better tools and experiences. Like, people don't understand what they're stuck with very bad old school tool while they can use Gmail and Google Docs and stuff like that for free. Debatable, but okay. So they're like, yeah, but why are we super like old Bronze Age here while at home I have these fancy things? So they're kind of starting demanding to have better things in enterprise too. Then my advice here is transparency. Make the research and your design process visible, public, to everyone. It's like, help other people understand that you're not the kind of magic wand who makes things pretty. Make them understand that what they see on the screen, like this new search, is the result of months. And it's like, yeah, it's very simple. You have a few buttons, and then you click, you have more buttons done. It's like, yeah, that's months of research and months of iteration and things like that. So basically, make the complexity visible and the kind of complexity of your work too. So what I do is, I also involve developer a lot. So whenever I'm starting new usability session, I'm like, hey, does any developer want to come listen? Are you interested into hearing and seeing user actually use the stuff you built? And usually they're quite happy. And when we have verbatims and research results, I'm sharing with the whole team, like the developers, QA, BA, everyone. And also one thing is, some UX deliverables are very useful to other people. Like if you're using user journey map or user flow, those can help QA, tester, things like that. So maybe think about also what can you share with other people from your work that will make their life easier. Turning developers into and QAs and any colleagues into design advocates is very helpful. So usually I'm the one doing the first step. So I try to understand the developer language. I attend all the agile meetings. I have a lot of discussion with them upfront to make sure that everything that gets designed is actually going to be technically possible. And eventually they will understand that, yeah, the value of the design, and know that I have my developer advocating for me. I was like, no, I don't think I can take that decision. We need to check with Stephanie first, things like that. So it takes a little bit of time, but by building trust and finding allies within the technical team, you can also shine. I was like, yeah, the cool thing though is, since the bar is so low with those tools, there's a huge potential for improvement, and it's very rewarding when you work in those tools, because you see people who are actually genuinely happy about how things change. I have like amazing verbatims of users who say things like, this, in 10 years at the bank, is the first time I see a project moving towards the right direction. Thanks you for involving us. I was like, yes, thank you. That's the kind of verbatim I put to my stakeholder, by the way. So yeah. And then one thing is, change management become also part of your job as a designer, which I wasn't prepared to, but okay. So some people will need a little bit of hand-holding. So what we did is we prepared a lot of things. We prepared support. Again, we helped the different team reach out to their users in order to help them with change. And one thing that worked very nicely is to get champions and advocates in our user base. And usually you want maybe not the people who use it the most, but you want the big mouth. Like the people who will chat about this and tell others that it's it's working nicely. You also want the kind of the natural trainers, you know, like that person who knows how the computer works and everyone is going to ask them. That person is also a very great advocate because everyone is eventually going to ask them. So one very small thing that we did and that user loved, bear in mind this is enterprise, it's not revolutionary, is we did some little early adopter badge, and this worked so nicely. So our beta users, to thank them, we said, we did these little badges, do you want one to put into your email signature? And it's a Trojan horse. There's a link on that that sends to the new interface. And same, we had those links in our signature with the name of the project and all of that. And it's kind of big part of change management is getting the word out that there's a new tool and getting people used to the idea and this sort of thing. So first, the early adopters were super happy about getting the little badge and very proud and all of that. So that was very, very cool. And it kind of helped a lot because we have support from people who will change their email signature for us, which is huge. So it's kind of, sometimes the very little things can have a big impact. And then, finally, complexity is scary, but if you cut it down in smaller parts and document the whole process, usually and eventually, you will kind of get along with it and find a way to deal with the complexity. So this is my true, real design process. It starts with complexity, arriving on a project and freaking out. What the hell is that? How am I supposed to design that? What can I do with that? And then you have this giant pile of mess, of hair. And you start doing some analysis, you start talking to people, to colleagues, you start checking the documentation, you start taking one little thread and bringing it somewhere, and it's like, okay, it's not perfect, but I kind of get small parts. And then you do your user research. You talk to the users. You find things, you understand a little bit better, and it kind of becomes like a puzzle, and all of a sudden you have these little pieces that click together, and you're like, huh, okay, that actually makes sense. And then you design your solution, and eventually all of those giant pile of hair and thread become a design solution, and then you test it and you iterate again. Yeah, I think it's important, especially for junior, to acknowledge the fear. Because no one is telling you that in design school. It's you will arrive in an environment and you will wonder, what are you doing here? It's yeah, you will, but trust me, it gets better. So yeah, there's a lot of improvement opportunity in there, and I kind of hoped I convinced you that enterprise product can be made better, and there's a real potential for designers there. And if you have any questions, please reach out. I have a blog, stephaniewalter.design, and I have a workshop on accessibility for designers that has nothing to do with enterprise UX, but there's still some room, so if you're interested, it's in 2 days in Antwerp. Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Shall we sit?
Oh, wow, we have questions. Oh, my God, this is it's a never-ending story. Well, we have concerns.
Oof.
We have concerns, I have to say. Oh, I'm in the wrong file. There was the same question that kept coming back a couple of times. This goes pretty much like this. How do you keep your motivation? Or how you not get frustrated? Or how do you keep sane? Or how do you not go crazy? Or how can you actually push through because of all the bureaucracy and how you build, because of all the bureaucracy and internal politics? How?
Yeah. Allies. Honestly, I'm super happy to have amazing colleagues. And when something is not working or weird, I'm doing a reality check with my friends and with my colleagues where we're okay, if at some point something is weird, if I think it's weird, maybe it's me, but if me, another colleague, and another colleague, we all think it's weird and it's not working, maybe it's not us, maybe it's the system. So it's having really great colleagues you can talk to, and I'm a single designer, UX team of 1, but I'm not alone. I have colleagues who help me on a daily basis, and I think that's very important. But yeah, if the whole environment is very complex and the colleagues are not great, that's for sure a recipe for a disaster at some point. It's more complex.
Yeah, I think one thing that you mentioned was kind of building allies, or finding the ways of to making these connections. I think that very often when we start out a project like that, especially if you're working in B2B, I think, you end up having almost like this opposite relationship. So you have sales over there pushing their ideas and working against us almost, and then you have designers. I think that personally I found a lot of value by actually having conversations with sales and with customer success teams and so on, because they usually have a very clear connection with the client that you, with the users that you usually might not have at all, right?
Yeah.
So the question that came up here as well is, what kind of allies do you build, and how do you build allies for your work?
Food. Food. Feed them. First, no, I'm joking. Half. So I'm usually very candid. You know, so the complex thing in Luxembourg, I don't know if it's the same in other countries, but the concept of business analyst is a little bit weird. Is someone who is going to talk to the user to understand the business side. And at some point, I'm like, but are we going to overstep on each other's toes, something like that? So what I usually do, I'm very kind of, whenever I work with someone new, I'm explaining to them, okay, this is who I am, this is how I work, this is what I can bring to the table. What do you do? What do you want to do? How shall we collaborate? And it's very silly, but like it kind of kills a lot of assumptions. You know, you can do roles and responsibility, but that's kind of more, not advanced, but very official. So just having a conversation to with the people, saying, okay, this is how we do it, how do you want to proceed, being very candid about that, I think it helps a lot, because at the end of the day, I don't think people are here to annoy you or do bad work. They might just don't understand what you do, so yeah, just present who you are, explain, and show them the value. Like, I share a lot of things with the developers, with the QA also, and it helps a lot because they understand. Also, I make their life easier. Like, for developers, I document a lot of things so that they don't have to think about it, and I think that also helps make friends.
Right.
And then food, yeah, also too.
Okay, good to know. Stan is wondering, in user research, how do you steer people away from offering solutions and instead surface the problem?
Do you want me to sing? Like what's I forgot the name of the one, like, ask me why. So that's like, you ask why, but you don't ask why, like why. Like, when they tell you something, you find ways to kind of dig a little bit further. So like I did with the export to Excel. I'm not like, why do you need an export to Excel? I'm like, no, okay. I find a more elegant way. Like, okay, you don't have it today, so what do you do? How do you do that? And then I kind of try to grab the why. So that's usually a joke, like, as UXer, we ask 5 times why, but it's very annoying if you do that to another human being. Yeah. So it's more like finding all the follow-up question to dig in a little bit further. And there's a lot of like help out there. If you want, I have a cheat sheet with UX cards with different questions you can ask. And there's some of those who help dig a little bit further for sure. So I think it's also about kind of being used to finding workaround to ask why and having conversation with people.
I can also highly recommend these cards, by the way. They're wonderful and very, very affordable, in so many ways. Like €3 or something. So maybe a few more questions in here while we have them. It's interesting because like every now we have a conversation about enterprise. There is always a conversation that you could also find something that's similar complexity but nicer in B2C. So Michelle is wondering, do you want to switch to the more fancier B2C interfaces at some point? Knowing that you've gained so much knowledge on these complex B2B interfaces. So do you see yourself transitioning into B2C at some point?
I don't know. I think it's more about the project I would be interested in too.
Like the challenges that come with it.
I did e-commerce and I found it a little bit boring because it's often the same, and it's often the same on the user research, but then it's very data-driven, and often if you're not like super high-level quantitative A/B testing all the stuff, you get a little bit lost. So this is why I kind of prefer the enterprise thing, because you really go and you dig further. And it's like, I love observational study. Like, I worked on a project where I just did a whole day of shadowing in car dealership, where I would follow people around and understand how they work and take notes and take pictures and stuff like that. So I think you can do that also in B2C, but less often, because it's less maybe task-oriented in some ways. So for now, I kind of enjoy the whole enterprise, but I don't know. I would love to work on video game accessibility, but I have zero experience in video games, so I don't think that's going to happen.
Okay, well, I think that we have wonderful people listening for sure.
That could be fun.
And maybe just a few more questions. We have 3.5 minutes, so let's see how many we can get through. One of them is more philosophical, I guess. How do you handle a difficult person?
Sorry, what?
How do you handle a difficult person? To be specific, who doesn't want to change how they think or how they work?
That's the thing, is at some point you're doing change management at the whole company level, so it's not just on you. And we have some difficult users, but at the end of the day, they will not have a choice. We are going to decommission the old interface at the end of the year. So we are now in a transition phase where, I should not say that, it's... I don't think I have users who listen, but like we have a secret link where they can go back to the old one if they need to, but they have to come and ask the support, and they have to explain us exactly what is missing. And then the stakeholder decide do we keep the old link or not. So they have to have a legit reason. Mm-hmm. It's like, if we miss some content at some point because the whole thing is a giant mess and maybe there was something missing, okay. Otherwise, at some point, after a whole year of beta testing with the new one, they will not have any choice. So that's the thing. If you want change, it can't come just from the tool from bottom to top. It also needs to go from top to bottom to say, look, that's a new tool. You had a whole year, like we're really cuddling them. Honestly, like I've rarely been in an environment where I think the changing from Skype and Team is a 2-year change management process. Mm-hmm. It's like you have 2 years at some point. You push them. Honestly, it's political, and then you remove the old tool, and that's it.
Yeah, I think it's always like people are difficult. Just difficult. Like, if we could just deal with them, the easiest.
The thing is, I don't know, like the users are not difficult. I kind of get it, you spend so many years in learning how one tool is working. Yeah. Or also, what we do is sometimes we do one-on-one with them, and then we kind of show them the new features, and we try to make them understand, okay, you might have to go somewhere else to click, but look at all the new features that will make you gain a lot of time. And that usually helps a lot, because they're like, yeah, okay, I have to change the way I work, but this is a very cool feature I want to use, so you kind of give them candies or something.
Okay, excellent. We see a trend happening here. 1 more minute to go. One interesting question that came up very quickly as well, the last one. I'm working in a cool team with a great UX AI-oriented mentality, but another company has just asked me to join for more money. It's like a very strong focus on more, I think, at this point. Right? But it seems to be very boring, very ugly, and very hard to use project to work on. Which one would you join? The beautiful but cheap? Oh, this is getting really interesting. I think I'm really looking forward to conversations later tonight. Right? Beautiful but cheap, or ugly, boring, but rich, with emphasis.
So, do you prefer like 5 meters arm or very wobbly legs?
I don't know.
That's the question.
Yeah, I guess.
It's hard to, because I don't know whoever you are. If you want to discuss, we can. But like, I don't know in your situation, like, how much money do you need? Is the richness?
Yeah, we can go into a lot of detail.
Yeah, that's kind of like, tell me why.
Okay. Yes, exactly. All right, and then I think the last one that I wanted to ask actually is like, do you have any really challenging part that would be, video games accessibility would be challenging on its own. Yeah. But if you look into enterprise or B2B, do you feel like there are some really interesting challenges where you find a lot of, excitement when you try to solve them or address them? Or is it just basically depends on what kind of project it is? Like, just to give you an idea, I would always want to work on healthcare, like something really impactful. And I think in many ways, like, healthcare can be very, very complex, and of course, it's also a lot of responsibility there as a designer. But that would be kind of very high on my list. Do you have something?
I did healthcare. It was very rough. Some of the user interview, because like the discussion you have, especially was around elderly people, and like, yeah, complicated topic. So healthcare is quite interesting, I think. But I really loved what Luke was showing this morning. I was like, yeah, this is what our user wants. They want to do that. We have so many documents everywhere at the bank, in SharePoint and all of that. And I think they would love a place where you ask a question and then it kind of gathers you the data. And I would love to work on something like that, but for enterprise, kind of this solution where you need to do a project and you need information about, I don't know, train in North Rhine-Westphalia. That's an actual example.
That's very specific.
Yeah, that's a user interview I had a couple of weeks ago that kind of stuck in my mind. I was like, yeah, like, give me all the train stuff, and like, based on all the document we had, I would love to work on something like that, because like, information architecture challenge, but also UX challenge. So yeah, that's the thing. I think I would love to do something where AI is kind of a tool used to make users' life easier, help them find stuff with the giant documentation that we have. That would be very, very nice and very cool. I just sent a link to my colleague this morning. I was like, can we do that?
Excellent. So if you're listening and you may be working on something similar, you can always reach out to Steph. And also highly recommend you to follow the newsletter, the posts, and all. Steph posts a lot of really useful, incredible stuff. And thank you so much for all your work, Steph, and for the talk.
See you around.